Sparks fly on Capitol Hill as U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi confronts Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett over incendiary remarks targeting Elon Musk. Accusations of political violence, arson, and deep hypocrisy ignite a firestorm. The hearing room was tense, every camera lens fixed, every phone recording, every breath held in anticipation. The House Oversight Committee had seen its share of conflict over the years, but today's confrontation was something else entirely. A high-stakes collision of power, ego, and ideology. And at the center of the storm stood two women. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi, composed and relentless, and Texas Representative Jasmine Crockett, defiant and unrepentant. It began with Bondi's opening remarks, calm but edged with unmistakable resolve. "Madam Chair, members of this committee," she said, "I'm here not only as the Attorney General of the United States, but as someone who believes words matter, especially when they come from this chamber." She didn't need to name Jasmine Crockett. The room already knew. Last week, Bondi continued, a sitting member of Congress stood before her constituents and said, and I quote, "Elon Musk must be taken down." Days later, a Tesla dealership in Fort Worth was firebombed in what we are now treating as a domestic terror incident. The message, clear. The timing, not coincidental. Gasps rippled across the room. Crockett, sitting upright and stone-faced, didn't flinch. But that wasn't all, Bondi went on, flipping through a folder of documented transcripts and news clippings. Representative Crockett also said, quote, "It's time Elon got what's coming to him. If people are lighting things up, maybe that's just the spark we needed." And when asked to clarify if she was condoning violence, she smiled and said, "I'm just saying, some things burn for a reason." A meme, a few murmurs from the crowd. Crockett scoffed quietly, crossing her arms. Bondi's voice sharpened. "This is not just irresponsible. It is dangerous. These remarks are not political theater. They are the equivalent of gasoline on a fire. And while Representative Crockett may cloak herself in righteous indignation, the facts are clear. Her words were not taken out of context. They were taken literally. And they are driving violence. At that, Crockett leaned forward into the mic. "As a black woman in America," she began, but Bondi didn't hesitate to cut in. No, we are not doing that today," Bondi said firmly. "We are not going to use identity as a shield from accountability. This isn't about your race, your gender, or your background. It's about the violence you are stoking and the lives you're putting at risk. You don't get to light the match and claim you're the victim of the fire." The gallery shifted uncomfortably. Crockett's brow furrowed, but she stayed silent. For now. Bondi pressed forward. "This administration has taken an uncompromising stance against violent threats, whether they come from extremists on the far right or radicalized rhetoric from the left. And yet, when three individuals, two of whom have been confirmed supporters of Representative Crockett, were arrested this week for attempting to torch more Teslas in Houston, she called the charges overblown and politically motivated." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. She said, "If you think a few burning cars is terrorism, then you've never had to live in fear as a black American." Bondi looked directly at Crockett now. "With all due respect, Congresswoman, what you're describing is not fear. It's justification, and what you are promoting, whether you admit it or not, is violence. That is the very definition of domestic terrorism." Crockett turned on her mic again, this time with more force. "You want to talk about violence? Let's talk about state-sanctioned violence. Let's talk about how the system protects billionaires like Elon Musk, while communities like mine suffer." Bondi didn't blink. "Let's also talk about hypocrisy. Because when the governor of your state, Greg Abbott, was mocked by you, referred to as Hot Wheels, after being paralyzed in a tragic accident, you refused to apologize. You laughed. You stood by it. You said, 'I'm just keeping it real.'" Several committee members shifted in their chairs. One Republican coughed into his hand to hide a smirk. But the Democrats were dead quiet. They knew the clip. They had seen the fallout. Bondi lowered her voice, bringing a sharp intensity to her tone. You are not keeping it real. You are using real pain to justify reckless behavior. And your refusal to denounce this violence, your refusal to apologize, and your attempt to weaponize identity politics to escape scrutiny, it ends here. The room was so quiet you could hear the shuffling of a camera crew adjusting their mic boom. The Justice Department is moving forward with severe charges against the 3 suspects involved in the recent arson attacks. We are classifying these incidents as acts of domestic terrorism, not just property damage. Because this is not about cars, it's about a coordinated effort to intimidate and incite. Bondi turned to face the full committee now. And let me make something very clear. Congresswoman Crockett must tread carefully. Because if evidence continues to mount that her rhetoric contributed to this wave of violence, then this will no longer be a matter for political theater. It will be a matter for criminal investigation. Gasps echoed louder this time. She must apologize immediately, Bondi said. Not only to the people of Texas, not only to the American shareholders of Tesla, but to this nation. Because what she is promoting is not resistance. It is insurrection. In slow motion, the chairman tried to interject, but Bondi wasn't finished. We are living in a time when the stakes are too high to let dangerous rhetoric go unchecked. And I will not sit by while a member of Congress incites violence and then hides behind hashtags and headlines. Pam Bondi sat down, her statement complete. But the silence she left behind was thunderous. Crockett stared straight ahead, jaw tight, her fingers tapping against the desk in defiance. And then slowly, she reached for the microphone again. A low hum of anticipation pulsed through the chamber as Representative Jasmine Crockett leaned in, her fingers tightening around the microphone as if bracing herself to grip the narrative back from the hands of Attorney General Pam Bondi. Her eyes locked onto Bondi's across the polished wood of the committee table. This wasn't just testimony anymore. It was a battle for control of the national conversation. I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by you, Crockett began, her voice firm, laced with both defiance and self-righteous fury. Not when you've spent your entire career protecting the powerful and turning a blind eye to the pain of communities like mine. She paused for effect, looking around the room as if to summon sympathy from the press gallery behind her. You want to talk about accountability, Ms. Bondi? Where was this energy when unarmed Black Americans were being shot in the streets? Where was this fire when children in my district were drinking lead from their pipes? Or when billionaires, like Elon Musk, were cozying up to foreign dictators while raking in taxpayer subsidies? A small smattering of applause echoed from the gallery. Likely activists, aligned with Crockett, ready to post the clip before the hearing had even ended. But Bondi didn't flinch. She watched, calculating, as Crockett leaned deeper into her. Rhetorical rhythm. What you call incitement, I call expression. What you call violence, I call consequence. Elon Musk has spent years exploiting workers, spreading misinformation, and manipulating markets with tweets. And now that the people are rising up, now that they're demanding justice, you come running to protect the billionaire class like it's your holy mission. Bondi folded her hands but said nothing. I will not apologize, Crockett declared, punctuating each word. I will not apologize for speaking truth to power. I will not apologize for being angry. And I certainly will not apologize to shareholders of a trillion-dollar company that's built its fortune off the backs of everyday Americans. The words echoed, but they didn't land the way Crockett may have hoped. Pam Bondi sat up slowly, her chair barely creaking as she adjusted her posture. Composed, deadly. Let me respond, she said quietly, her voice slicing through the room with scalpel precision. The chair nodded. Attorney General Bondi, you may respond. Bondi didn't look at the chair. She only looked at Crockett. You just justified arson on the floor of Congress. A hush fell again. You stood there, and in front of the American people, declared that setting fire to property, threatening lives, and terrorizing communities was a form of expression, of justice. She shook her head slightly, incredulous. This is not activism. This is anarchy. And you are not speaking truth to power. You are playing with fire and calling it freedom. Bondi pulled a page from her folder, an FBI briefing report, still partially redacted, and held it aloft. According to this document, she said, one of the suspects arrested in Houston when interrogated said, and I quote, "We did it because of what Crockett said. She gets it. She said it's time to act, and we did." Crockett stiffened, blinking rapidly. A flicker of something crossed her face. Was it panic? We traced Telegram group messages, burner accounts, and donations to bail funds promoted by your former campaign staff, Bondi continued, her words landing like hammer strikes. Now I am not accusing you of direct coordination yet, but the pattern is disturbing. At the very least, you have emboldened criminal behavior, and that will be investigated. Crockett interrupted. So now it's illegal to express frustration? Since when did being angry become terrorism? Bondi didn't miss a beat. Since your words lit fires. Since people got hurt. Since innocent employees at that Tesla dealership had to crawl out of a burning showroom because someone wanted to send a message. That's not frustration. That's attempted murder. The committee room had transformed into a courtroom, and Bondi held the gavel in all but name. And this "I'm angry" defense, she went on, it's a distraction. You didn't just mock Greg Abbott. You mocked every person with a disability when you called him Hot Wheels in front of a cheering crowd, laughed, and then doubled down on it the next morning during a breakfast interview. Do you remember what you said? I have the quote right. Here? She glanced down. You said, if the wheels fit, roll with it. You smiled. You called the backlash manufactured outrage. Crockett opened her mouth but found no words waiting. And here you are again, Bondi continued, voice rising, hiding behind your identity, behind slogans and hashtags, behind the phrase, as a black woman, as if it absolves you from any consequence of your actions. No one here is attacking your identity. They are calling out your conduct. That's what matters. The chairman began to interject again, sensing the heat escalating, but Bondi didn't yield. The public deserves leaders who model restraint, not ones who light rhetorical Molotov cocktails and then act shocked when buildings burn. Crockett's hands were shaking now, barely perceptible, but Bondi noticed. She leaned in slightly. I don't question your passion. I question your judgment. Then she turned to the broader committee. And make no mistake, the Justice Department will continue its investigation. If any further links emerge between Representative Crockett's rhetoric and these criminal acts, the full weight of federal law will be applied. Period. At that moment, a voice erupted from the gallery, someone shouting, "You're silencing black voices," before security ushered them out, fast and firm. Crockett leaned into the chaos, seizing the moment. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she cried. "They want to criminalize dissent. They want to silence us when we speak up against injustice. This is a witch hunt dressed up in legalese." Bondi turned slowly. "No, Congresswoman, this isn't a witch hunt. This is accountability. And if you truly believe in justice, then you will do what's right. You will denounce the violence. You will apologize for inciting chaos. You will take responsibility." But Crockett stayed silent. Her stare was sharp but distant now. Her words, for once, caught somewhere between rage and retreat. The committee chair finally gavelled for order, his voice a strained attempt to cool. "The boiling room. We will recess for 10 minutes. The gavel came down with a dull thud, but the tension didn't lift. Staffers rushed toward their principals. Reporters huddled near the exits to file breaking headlines, and cameras stayed rolling. Pam Bondi rose from her seat and walked slowly out of the chamber, leaving Crockett sitting alone at the long table, the microphone still hot in front of her, her moment of control now slipping through her fingers. But outside the hearing room, something else was brewing. As the committee room emptied into a swirling mix of staffers, press, and security, a different current of tension began to charge the marble corridors of the Capitol. Reporters hustled down the hallways, whispering into phones, tweeting in real time. Word had broken that a sealed indictment related to the Tesla arson suspects might be unsealed within hours, and that one of the names involved could be connected to Jasmine Crockett's own congressional staff. At first it was a rumor, then came a leak. A Justice Department spokesperson, under strict anonymity, confirmed that a former digital strategist for Crockett's campaign, Anthony Ross, was under federal investigation for his alleged role in organizing encrypted online chats that coordinated direct actions against Tesla dealerships across Texas. While no charges had been filed against Crockett herself, the implication was unmistakable. The circle was tightening. Back inside the committee lounge, Crockett sat surrounded by her advisors, her jaw clenched as her chief of staff whispered furiously in her ear. The tone was hushed, but frantic. "They've got Anthony," her aide said. "We don't know what they're going to say, but the DOJ's clearly trying to thread this needle right back to you. You need to get ahead of this." Crockett shook her head. "I'm not apologizing. They want me to bow, to beg. I'm not giving Bondi the soundbite she wants." "Jasmine," her communications director hissed, "this isn't about pride anymore. If you don't take control of the narrative right now, you'll be fighting this story from a courtroom, not a podium." Down the hall, Pam Bondi was already preparing for the next round. She knew the gravity of the moment. Her statement was being reviewed line by DOJ officials, and aides from the White House were now coordinating with her office on broader messaging. President Harper, in an off-camera briefing, had signaled support for Bondi's firm stance and hinted that further arrests were imminent. Bondi stood in front of a mirror, adjusting the collar of her jacket with the same precision she brought into the hearing chamber. She wasn't interested in gloating. She was preparing. Every word mattered. Every facial expression would be dissected. She knew this wasn't just a political battle. It was a national reckoning with a dangerously performative political culture, and she was walking the fine line between enforcement and censorship. A knock came at her office door. Her senior advisor stepped in. "We've got confirmation. The DOJ is moving forward with charges against Ross. They're naming him in connection with 2 arson attempts and conspiracy to incite violence. He's flipping. He's talking." Bondi's eyes narrowed. "Does he link it back to Crockett?" "He's saying she didn't give direct orders, but that she knew. That she was aware of the chat groups, saw the rhetoric, and told them to keep pushing the message. We're verifying. But if that holds, it's over for her." Bondi didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply nodded. "Then we proceed." Back in the committee chamber, the recess ended. Crockett re-entered to a cold, shifting energy. Reporters who had earlier vied for her attention now whispered as she passed, their phones glowing with fresh alerts. Members of the committee glanced at their aides, reading real-time bulletins from Capitol Hill insiders. She sat. The room quieted. The chair tapped the gavel. "The hearing will now resume." Pam Bondi returned to the witness table. This time, her expression carried a new weight, less adversarial, more solemn, as though even she understood that the situation had tipped from combative to consequential. "I've just received word," Bondi began, "that the Justice Department is unsealing charges this afternoon against Anthony Ross, a former digital strategist for Congresswoman Crockett's campaign. He is being charged with conspiracy to commit arson and incitement of violence across state lines." Crockett stiffened. Her hands froze atop the desk. Bondi continued. Mr. Ross has provided sworn statements indicating that he helped organize encrypted channels advocating direct action against Tesla. He alleges that Congresswoman Crockett was aware of these channels and encouraged continued engagement. Though, we stress, this is still under investigation. The room was silent. Crockett looked stunned for the first time, her tongue pinned behind her teeth. Bondi lowered the sheet of paper in her hand. Let me be clear again. If these allegations are substantiated, the consequences will be severe. The Department of Justice will not allow elected officials, no matter their party, their status, or their popularity, to act as firebrands for real-world violence. Crockett finally found her voice, but it had lost its defiant shine. He's lying. He's scared. He's saying whatever he needs to cut a deal. Bondi didn't take the bait. Then prove him wrong. Cooperate. Release your communications. If there's nothing to hide, you should be the first one demanding transparency. Crockett snapped back. This is a political prosecution. This is about silencing progressive voices that speak truth to injustice. Bondi responded with chilling clarity. This is about fire, about charred wreckage, about people who nearly died because they happened to work for a company you decided was evil. This isn't ideology. It's crime. The chair tried once, more to calm the proceedings. Let's keep this focused on facts and allow both sides the opportunity. But Bondi wasn't done. I warned this committee weeks ago that we were entering dangerous territory, where elected officials trade policy for performance and rage for responsibility. This is where that road leads. When speeches become matches and applause becomes permission. Crockett stood up. You're trying to make an example out of me because I refuse to play by the rules that protect people like Elon Musk. Bondi's rose too slowly. No, Congresswoman. I'm holding you accountable because you think the rules don't apply to you at all. The room was erupting again. Committee members shouting over one another, reporters flooding the exits to update their headlines, and aides whispering about a possible ethics investigation. But amid the chaos, a moment of clarity cut through. The hearing was no longer just about words, or even about Elon Musk. It had become something far more serious, a confrontation between the unchecked rage of modern politics and the long-overdue reassertion of responsibility. As the chairman called for an emergency recess, a subpoena request for Crockett's digital records was quietly filed by a bipartisan subcommittee. Phones buzzed with the news. And down in the Capitol's press room, DOJ officials prepared for a televised statement that would send shockwaves across the country. The reckoning had only just begun. The next 48 hours moved like political earthquakes, shaking foundations and toppling long-held assumptions about who could get away with what in Washington. The fallout from the congressional hearing ignited every screen, podcast, and newsroom in the country. Twitter feeds were flooded with clips of the confrontation. Pam Bondi's icy, precise rebuke of Congresswoman Crockett, Crockett's heated, impassioned retorts. The media machine spun into overdrive, but beneath the headlines and hashtags, the machinery of accountability began grinding forward with devastating momentum. By the next morning, the Department of Justice had released a detailed briefing outlining the scope of the domestic terror charges filed against Anthony Ross and two other associates. In a televised statement, Bondi stood flanked by senior federal prosecutors and calmly walked the nation through a series of damning revelations: Telegram chat logs, burner phone messages, and digital transfers traced to a crowdfunding campaign, coordinated in part through a now-deleted private Slack channel tied to Crockett's political outreach team. The evidence was layered and damning, not enough to warrant charges against Crockett herself yet, but far beyond the realm of coincidence. Most explosive of all was a recovered voice message Ross had sent to the group 2 weeks prior to the Fort Worth arson. "She's not telling us to act, but she's nodding." She said, quote, "Push harder. Let them know we're not afraid to torch the old system." Within hours, the House Ethics Committee announced a formal inquiry into Crockett's conduct. The Texas legislature, already wary of her growing notoriety, released a joint statement condemning her remarks, calling them unbecoming, inciting, and incompatible with the duties of public office. Pressure mounted from within her own party as moderate Democrats sought to distance themselves, fearing the public backlash and branding risk ahead of the midterms. But the final nail didn't come from outside. It came from within. A leaked email from a senior Crockett staffer to the campaign's legal team revealed internal concerns months ago about Ross's activities and the combustible tone coming from Crockett herself. The staffer warned that Crockett's off-the-cuff rhetoric was inviting legal exposure, and that her refusal to dial it back would ultimately hurt the movement she claims to represent. The leak hit like a bomb. Crockett's own team had tried to intervene, and she had ignored them. That evening, Jasmine Crockett held a press conference on the Capitol steps, the same place where so many had rallied behind her in the past. But tonight the mood was different. Gone were the crowds, gone were the chants and slogans. Only a sparse collection of loyalists and a sea of cameras stood before her. She stepped up to the mic, still wearing the defiant expression she had become known for, but the fire in her voice had cooled into something else. Resignation, perhaps. "I want to make one thing clear," she began, her voice slightly hoarse. "I never told anyone to commit a crime. I never authorized violence, and I never intended for my words to be taken as a green light for destruction." A pause. "But intent isn't always enough, and I've come to understand that the impact of our words, especially in positions of power, carries a weight that cannot be dismissed. I let my anger take the wheel. I let frustration become justification. And for that, I was wrong." The words were unexpected. Even Bondi, watching from a secure conference room at DOJ headquarters, paused the live feed. It wasn't an apology written by committee, it was a reckoning in real time. Crockett continued, "I want to apologize to the people of Texas, to the employees who were caught in the crossfire of actions I never should have flirted with in my rhetoric. I apologize to the American public, and yes, to Elon Musk and the shareholders of Tesla. You didn't deserve to be targets." She took a breath that seemed to pull a decade's worth of weight through her chest. "I have asked the Ethics Committee to continue its investigation without obstruction. I will cooperate fully. And effective immediately, I am stepping down from my seat on the Oversight Committee while this process continues." Gasps broke out among the press. A few aides wiped their eyes. For the first time in months, the storm surrounding Jasmine Crockett began to break. Not with cheers or jeers, but with the solemn quiet of consequence. Elsewhere, Pam Bondi met privately with President Harper and senior DOJ officials to discuss the broader implications of the hearing and fallout. There would be no gloating, no victory lap, just a firm, steady plan to continue holding public officials to the same standard expected of every citizen. After the meeting, Bondi held a brief press conference. "This was never about Elon Musk," she said plainly. "It was never about cars or shareholders. It was about the line between protest and violence, and how we hold those in power accountable when they cross it. Today, we took a step back toward that line." A reporter asked whether she believed Crockett's apology was sincere. Bondi didn't hesitate. "I think it was long overdue. But yes, I believe it was real, and I hope it's the start of something better." The country seemed to take a collective breath. Though there were still investigations to complete, hearings to finish, and reforms to debate, something had shifted. The Crockett case had become a watermark moment, a reminder that no one is immune from the consequences of their influence, no matter how loudly they claim to be fighting for justice. In the weeks that followed, Congress passed a bipartisan resolution condemning political violence from all sides and urging members to commit to standards of responsible public discourse. The resolution, while largely symbolic, marked a cultural pivot. Public figures were put on notice. Inflammatory rhetoric was no longer protected under the guise of passion alone. Pam Bondi returned to her work at the DOJ, more respected, and more feared than ever. And Jasmine Crockett, though stripped of her committee assignments and facing a primary challenge she was unlikely to survive, began to speak more softly. She accepted invitations to town halls she once ignored. She wrote an op-ed for The Atlantic titled, "When the Fire You Start Burns You Back." It was reflective, measured, humble, and for the first time, it sounded like leadership. What began as a political spectacle had become a sobering lesson on the dangers of unchecked emotion in positions of power. In the theater of American politics, the curtain had fallen on one of its most dramatic acts, but in doing so, it left behind a rare clarity. Words matter. Responsibility matters more. And in the end, truth won, not through theatrics, but through the steady, unwavering hand of accountability.